it's an oligarchy. It's not a large percentage, but it's a fairly large absolute number. I mean, maybe we're talking about 2 million people, perhaps. Essentially, these are the people who write the laws, who write the news, who run the schools, direct the corporations.
As I often talk about, there's very few people. There's few independent media. There's few writers. I don't mean there's none, but there are very few that get down below the standard day-to-day coverage of Iran shot this many missiles and Israel did this, Israel killed or blew up their embassy, and that kind of day-to-day, very important coverage. I'm not saying don't do it, but we have to get under that as well as to why the U.S. is behaving the way it is. Why does the U.S. have a proxy war going on in Ukraine? And even beyond just, oh, we hate Russia and we wanted to drain Russia. That's getting a little deeper, but we can keep going even deeper. And that's what this article does. It's coming from Naked Capitalism, which is a great website. Will the American oligarchy accept limits or choose World War III? This is written by Connor Gallagher. And he says he saw a piece from the Century Foundation, which is a liberal think tank, titled "A Bolder American Foreign Policy Means More Values and Less War," unquote. Its central argument is that the U.S. must recenter our values like multilateralism and human rights that are core to our identity. So if you're smelling bullshit, you should be. The Century Foundation authors possess a Hollywoodized idea of America that isn't a land filled with brutal class structure, but with virtue, which flow out into the foreign policy that stands for international, humanitarian, or human rights law, right? We just have to get back to those good times, folks, when we were just a wonderful, pure nation and we just helped people and all that good stuff. We really just need to do that, you know, and then we'll be fine if we just get back to those values. It's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. That's always been an important quote. Century Foundation is onto something with its focus on values. It's just that it has it backwards. The problem is that values are what has the U.S. on the brink of World War III in multiple locations. These are the values of the United States. These are how it works. The dominant value at play there is a belief that Western capitalists have a right and a duty to exploit and profit off of every corner of the globe, just like capital must dominate labor. That's kind of the definition of capitalism, right? Is there's this tiny group of capitalists that have the capital, and they exploit you and me in order to make the most, in order to enrich themselves, in order to, as they would say, get the most done, right? Be the most efficient. That's how capitalism works. But it also works internationally. It also is the capital at the top is, the U.S. is one of the richest countries in the world, and that capital and those capitalists believe they own the world and believe that it is their job to exploit that world for their benefits. It must expand and find new sources of revenue. That is why the U.S. has to keep expanding. Israel has to keep expanding, is to keep finding new resources, finding new sources of revenue. Israel keeps increasing the population. They keep trying to bring more people into Israel. They're going to need more resources for that. Well, what do? They kick more Palestinians off their land. They steal more resources from Palestinians. So it's not just that this applies to the U.S. and the U.S. empire. It applies clearly to Israel and how it functions. The article continues, if governments in Russia and China impede that progress, project would also work, they must be destroyed. That is the value of the United States. The following are some questions or thought exercises for these think tanks to consider. The U.S. is a market state that is dominated by and run for transnational capital. Its foreign policy and the military are a tool of the American oligarchy. Therefore, any serious policy discussion needs to deal with the fact that national interests, as they're expressed today, are not in any real sense national, but representative of the interests of a small cohort of the super wealthy. That sentence is one of the most important things for people to understand, and so many people don't get it. So many people think that these people, the ruling elite, I call them, you can call them whatever you want. People say the corporatocracy, people say the rulers, people say the oligarchy. I often say ruling elite, whatever, parasitic sacks of shit. That also works. I throw in that one sometimes. Vampiric, blood-sucking monsters with mangled genitalia. That's also something that you'll often find in economics textbooks. That's what they call them. But whatever term you want to use, the foreign policy is a manifestation of their desire to own the world, to have hegemony, and to suck off. It didn't mean that to sound the way it did, but suck off the rest of the world. Suck off the teat of the rest of the world, right? That's less vulgar than what else you could suck off, I guess. But it's not national. Most of these decisions, like the proxy war in Ukraine, like Israel's special genocide operation, most of these decisions that the U.S. supports, like shipping weapons to Israel every 36 hours, even 57% of Biden voters say Israel's committing genocide. Most of these decisions are not actually what America wants. And even when America, the average American, sides with these decisions, it is only due to immense amounts of propaganda, tsunamis of propaganda, just washing over us. And so many people don't know to look outside of the mainstream media outlets, the ones that send out memos saying, don't mention refugee camps. Let's see, not national, but representative of the interests of a small cohort of super wealthy. When U.S. officials go on about spreading freedom, they're not lying. It's just their idea of freedom is a state devoted to high profits, free from the political whims of local populations that could degrade an investment's expected return. Freedom from political whims. What's that sentence actually mean? Freedom from democracy, right? Freedom from you and me being able to vote to change things. And there are so many examples where the ruling elite have found ways around this, the answering to democracy, answering to you and me voting, answering to what we want. There are so many ways they do it. One is by buying the elections, another is by rigging elections, another by gerrymandering. But another is often they'll do trade deals not voted on by you or me, but trade deals are free from all democracy. They find a lot of ways around democracy. Let's remember there likely wouldn't be any problem with Russia, and he means problem as in the proxy war in Ukraine. It means there would be no battle with Russia right now had Putin not put an end to the 1990s shock therapy administered by the Western finance capitalists who were making a killing by pillaging Russian resources. In the 1990s, part of the reason Russia was so destroyed after the end of the Soviet Union was because it was just being pillaged by the oligarchs, but U.S. oligarchs were getting in on the action a lot as well. And Putin was actually kind of put into power, not exactly put into power, but allowed to rise to power in Russia by the ruling elite of the United States, because at the time he seemed very much like, I mean, he is pro-capitalist, but he seemed very much like another capitalist puppet that they could manipulate via dollar signs or sometimes threats, but mainly just dollar signs. And they thought he'd just be another one of those. They thought he'd be another Yeltsin. Anyway, so the article continues, administered by Western finance capitalists who are making a killing by pillaging Russia. The question is, will American capital ever voluntarily give up? Will it ever say, okay, we're satisfied with what we've got here. We've got enough. You do your thing in your sphere of influence. Basically backing off World War III and saying, Russia, you do you. China, you do you. You get your sphere of influence, and we'll do our thing. But the answer is no. The U.S. and our ruling elite will never back off of this. And it has to do with a systems understanding. When you understand how these systems work, how the motivations work, then you understand that all of these ruling elite, they're all sociopaths. They're all hungry for greed. And you could have them all guillotined tomorrow. And you know what would be at the top of the system? Sociopaths filled with greed. The article continues, it's not like Moscow and Beijing haven't tried. Russia, for example, floated the idea of joining NATO or working out some other security arrangement. For decades after the end of the USSR, Russia tried to be accepted into the West's club to no avail. Many people do not know this history either because we're basically told to be goldfish. We're told to have a memory of a couple of seconds. I mean, even our memory is told to be, we're told to have memories so short that when Iran fired those 300 drones and missiles at Israel, we were told to forget that Israel had just bombed their consulate and murdered some of their top officials and generals. Russia tried many times to be accepted by the West, to be accepted into these clubs, especially now that Russia is aggressively capitalist. They tried to get into NATO. They were told no. They tried to get into join with the EU, to work with the EU. They even, and this was the one that the U.S. just recently stopped, decided to get connected to Europe very closely economically via things like gas pipelines, with names like Nord Stream and Nord Stream 2. And what did the U.S. do? Created a proxy war and blew up the Nord Stream pipelines. So that shows you how much Russia's accepted into these clubs. The article continues, China, too, constantly repeats the refrain that the world is big enough for both Beijing and Washington. It invited the U.S. to join the Belt and Road Initiative. The U.S. could have helped steer projects that would have benefited both countries. Instead, the U.S. wanted the whole pie, wants full hegemony. And instead, we got the TPP, sanctions, export bans, a new Cold War, a spy balloon scandal, the disastrous effort to weaken Russia before taking on China. We kidnapped one of the CEOs of Huawei, the successful effort to sever Europe from Eurasia to disastrous effect for Europe. We accused China of genocide, even though we weren't accusing them of murdering anyone. We just said, oh, no, it's cultural genocide. Oh, that's interesting, considering they haven't murdered anyone, yet Israel's murdered 34,000 innocent people, and that's not genocide. I see. That makes a lot of sense. There is a lot of confusion over why the West keeps escalating in a losing effort. Digging this deep shows you why the U.S. is behaving this way, why the U.S. is involved in world wars that we're essentially losing. I mean, Ukraine is losing to Russia, and we're dumping billions of dollars into it. Israel's losing in almost every regard, except for how many innocent civilians they can kill. They're losing the world's backing. They're losing money. They're losing all their military weaponry. They've not proven that they can stop Hamas. They're basically destroying their ability to have an apartheid state. So why are we supporting that? Why are we supporting this ridiculous effort to cause another proxy war in Taiwan against China? And here's the answer, or a big part of the answer. Why, for example, are Western governments going around begging for shells, meaning missiles and ammo, etc., to send Ukraine rather than accepting the loss? The desperation seems to stem from creeping realization that their system is coming undone. The U.S. system is waning. The U.S. empire is on the decline in a big, big way. And rather than accept that and learn to work with it and create a sustainable, wonderful future for kids and grandkids, rather than doing that, creating a peaceful, cooperative world, the U.S. wants to set fire to everything in order to try and maintain our hegemony. We would rather be 90 seconds to midnight, according to atomic scientists on World War III. We'd rather be there on the brink of a nuclear winter, which would kill almost everyone. We'd rather be standing there, our ruling elite would, than stepping back and saying, maybe we make a little less money. Maybe we live a little less grand rather than destroying the planet. And instead, we're cooperative and create a sustainable future. Nope, can't happen. So he says the creeping realization that their system is coming undone. The entire post-World War II elite American mindset is built on the foundation of worldwide profit expansion via silicon and fire. And if they throw everything at Russia and lose, well, a whole new domino theory could come into play. They likely still feel insulated from the consequences of their actions, which fall most heavily on their proxy fighters and the working class. Isn't that nice, folks? It falls on us and the Nazis fighting in Ukraine. They're not all Nazis, I know, but a lot of them are Nazis. Working class folks, because the U.S. is spending $1 trillion a year on fighting these insane wars and not doing what? Fixing bridges that are collapsing left and right. And if you need a reminder, yes, the bridge that just collapsed right here in Baltimore does have to do with our ruling elite not willing to create a modern system for us. Rather, they'd put that money into the largest supply of nukes and missiles that the world has ever seen. Insulated from the consequences of their actions, which fall most heavily on their proxy fighters and the working class dealing with inflation and declining living standards. But the panic over this system's implosion is real and with good reason. The great irony in the West predicament is that finance capital's own greed has eroded its ability to satiate its greed around the world. Being so greedy, which is how our system is built, it's the gravity of capitalism. Being so greedy has eroded their ability to be this greedy, which, because capitalism is like cancer, right? It grows until it eats itself. And so we're at the chemotherapy part. That's where we are right now as a society. They hollowed out the West in order to make a quick buck, where the manufacturing isn't completely gone, but it is degraded, such as Boeing. Government has been reduced to a collection of worthless sycophants, only looking to cash in on their servitude, euphemism. Government is, especially on the federal level, is done. It's just, these are just money-grabbing sycophants. They're owned by corporate America. It's an inverted totalitarian system. It was American elites' greed that caused the American working class to lose 3.7 million decent-paying jobs from 2001 to 2018, and that's only from shipping jobs to China. We have shipped 3.7 million decent-paying jobs to China in 20 years. Wall Street's War on Workers, a book called Wall Street War on Workers, calculates that Wall Street strip mining of the U.S. has led to 30 million laid-off Americans since 1996. It's entirely unclear how exactly the U.S. would conduct a war with China, considering the war it won so much with China, considering it's so reliant on its minerals and components crucial to the American military. China has the components and the materials that make up all of our weapon systems and everything else. The U.S. Department of Interior released a list of 35 minerals it deems essential to the economic and national security in 2018, updated in 2022, amongst them many rare earth elements. The problem for the U.S. is that the local production of these materials is incredibly limited. China has a near complete monopoly on rare earth elements. And the U.S. military, according to U.S. government studies, is now 100% reliant upon China for the resources to produce its advanced weapon systems. So we need China in order to allow us to fight the war we want to fight with China. Can the U.S. expect its proxy warriors to keep enlisting if they're armed with sticks and kitchen knives going up against hypersonic missiles? Yeah, folks, you're going to escape. Are the national cannon fodder, all our soldiers, going to keep signing up to walk into missiles if you're holding a knife? If you're holding a spork? Never bring a spork to a missile fight. That's what they always say. And this last little part here, this brings us to another great irony. Anyone in the U.S. government with a few marbles left and a desire to make the U.S. a strong nation state, which nation state's an awful idea, and they're barbaric and they're dumb. They're just dumb. They're just juvenile. To make the U.S. a strong nation state again should be looking to an unlikely source for advice on how to rein in the U.S. oligarchy. They should talk to Russian President Vladimir Putin, who successfully tamed the oligarchy in his country, at least at points where it would impede national interests. There is still very much an oligarchy in Russia, but it doesn't, it's like he's saying it's unable to undermine national interests and sell off everything to the West. So he was able to rein them in to some degree. But If this author thinks that that's the long-term solution, then he too is deluded, because the long-term solution needs to be to evolve beyond capitalism. It is the only answer. And the idea that this system, industrial capitalism, has been around for a few hundred years and it is destroying everything. It is a cancer. It is eating everything until we all die. And the idea that something has been around for a few hundred years is the only way we could ever create society. It's the only way things can work, right? It's been around for the blink of an eye and it's destroying everything. And we're going, yeah, it's the only way. It's the only way we can do it. It's just to shoot ourselves in the head. That gets to the root of so much of why the U.S. is behaving the way it is, why the U.S. is taking us all off a cliff in order to push these wars and proxy wars.